I tell you, Len, it was 2 years ago. I sat through your course at Training Magazine's Conference and Expo. I'd seen you there multiple times. It was the first time I'd had the opportunity to go in and watch. And I was so impressed with what you were doing in there. I sent you a message and wanted to have you on earlier. Things didn't work out. I'm glad we have the opportunity to talk now because your presentation there was something special. And I want to thank you for what you do.
You're very kind. That must have been 2024,
It
right?
was. It was 2020.
A kind of funny thing, the other presenters were complaining nobody was in their rooms.
Because your place was packed. I had to sit
Yeah,
in the
yeah, it was
back.
packed. There was about 400 people there.
Yeah.
It was incredibly packed. And when you and I started communicating this time, actually saw a message from you asking about doing this. Perhaps you sent one earlier?
Back in 2024. You said you were.
And I just never saw it or didn't respond properly or some such thing.
Well, what you did was you said, let me get over the training conference. And I know what that's like. You got to get everything home and get unpacked. And then after that, life happens and things fall through the cracks. It happens
Yeah,
to everyone. So I'm
yeah,
glad we have the opportunity now. If you don't mind, what I like to do is just give everybody the opportunity to just tell me your story because you told me a little bit via email, but I want to hear the full version from you, not the
sure. It's very long. I mean, I just turned 74, so I mean, there's many years there. Uh, I started out as a childhood entertainer. I was doing magic shows for $5 a show for children's birthday parties when I was a teen. It doesn't seem like a lot of money now, but back then as a teen in the 60s, it was an awful lot of money. Joined a variety entertainment troupe and got upset that I found that the owner of the troupe was always at the mercy of the piano players. So I decided it was time for me to start playing piano. Because Doris Yeager was her name. I was she was my mentor. Ironically, many years later, when I did my Cartoons for Trainers book, she became my artist. So I repaid the mentoring by mentoring her as a cartoonist several years later. But anyhow, from music went into bands. First song I ever learned in a band was "And When I Die" by Blood, Sweat and Tears. And the last song I ever learned was "What's Love Got to Do with It" by Tina Turner. So all those years in there. Uh, Went to Berklee College of Music, got a degree in music composition. And this is a key point, and it goes to that presentation in 2024. A excellent musician or an excellent composer knows how to do two things and has to do them equally well. They have to be fully in balance, emotion and logic. At the time, I never realized it, but good training has to do both of those things too. Because when you prove something, you can gain consensus, but it's only when you reach them emotionally that you change behavior. Now, what you were talking about that presentation in 2024, it was geared heavily towards emotion and pulling emotion out of the audience. And I think you saw that firsthand. They were highly emotional. And for anyone listening, I'm not meaning crying and extreme emotions. I mean, just feeling what's going on emotionally. And so what I tried to do is I try to say something after they've already experienced it rather than the usual training module, particularly for online training, is to tell you something and then see if you got it and then say, that's great. Now let's move on, which is very analytical. And it doesn't really connect with people and motivate them. So anyhow, after 10 years on the road as a musician, magician, I decided I needed to get into business somehow, but in entertainment, and ended up, because we were on a cruise ship for that last year, ended up in Walt Disney World. Started in Epcot as host on the land boat ride. These are for some food crops of the tropics. On your left is cacao and interspersed with blah, 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 blah. Became what they call a lead for all those attractions. Spaceship Earth was my baby, still is. I'm still so fond of that place. Um, Ended up in character management at the studios. I was the character leader for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I was their stage manager for
Nice.
the Aladdin's Royal Caravan. And went through a number of jobs, was at the Disney University, was at the Disney Institute, was at Epcot Entertainment, was on opening crew for Disney's Animal Kingdom, and left while being one of the guys in charge of operations, learning, and development, the people that basically wrote the standard operating guides. And concurrently with all that, I was starting to realize that you could mix entertainment and learning, that they needed the same things, that they had plenty of logic, but they didn't have much emotion. Um, you may have also noticed this in 2024, but I didn't offer objectives. And the reason I didn't is because they're entirely logical and they matter to the people sponsoring the training, but they don't matter at all to the people in the room. So instead, I started with a magic trick where I was talking about facts are fun and they should be together as one. And it set up what the thing was about without me ever turning to a screen and saying, our objectives for today are to.
Yeah, I think it was I can't remember if it was Bob Pike that taught me this, but I learned it somewhere. I'll give it to Bob because he taught me so much that I forgot. I'll give him this. But I remember reading somewhere that you have to have objectives for designing, but not so much for delivering.
Yes. Yes. I think we make a mistake of thinking they matter to the learners. Now, they're important, they matter to the organization. But the learners, the typical example I offer is if you were going to do a financial training on how to pay yourself, the way most would do it would say, here's the software. Let's go to this screen now. On this screen, you push this button. I would do it completely different. I would start out with, so what do you like to do? And have everybody draw a picture of what they like to do or some sort of activity, and then use that as my introductions. But in the debrief, before I did the introductions, I had them show their picture. I'd ask, so why do we do that? Well, and lead them to the point that, well, we need money in order to do those things. And therefore, this is about getting the money you need to do what you like to do.
What's in
And
it
see,
for
all of a
them,
sudden,
right? What's in it for them?
you very, very different program. Um, but in all of this, somewhere around Disney University, I started running into problems with the Disney legal guys, because they didn't want to do things that were fun. So one example, her name was Thelma, and she was very straight laced. She must have come straight out of the military. She actually critiqued my asbestos awareness class and thought that a 10 question quiz I had was demeaning to the content. And because the last question of the quiz was, this subject is very important because A, the learners are nice people, B, the instructor has great hair, C, something else, and D, asbestos could really kill you if you're not careful. And they struck that question. And at that point, I was done. And I started thinking, well, what have I got that's different than anyone else? And I think this is a key point to our listeners: is everybody's world class at something. You just have to find it. The unique combination I had was an entertainment background and a learning background. And how could I combine them? And I put them together into a presentation called We've Got the Beat, that I did at ASTD in 98 or 99. And it was a smash hit. And next thing you knew, I had a book, this one, Training with a Beat. It was really, it just kind of took off. And from there, I said, well, what other entertainment techniques are there? And from there, the whole LearnerTainment flow developed. And the difficulty was keeping that separate from the mouse, because they have their thing and they have a right to have their thing. And I had my thing and I had a right to have my thing. But the people inside weren't quite thrilled about that. So eventually, after many years, I took a buyout package.
So it's amazing to me that even like the happiest place on earth, right? There's still the no fun league. That's like, no, we can't actually make training enjoyable. It has to be where they sit and it's lecture style and everything has to be very serious. But it goes back to what you said earlier, where there's emotion and logic. And one of the things that I've taught over the years is storytelling. And we teach people to tell stories because that's that's how you get them invested. And I remember I was in Alaska and I asked a group, why should we tell stories? And they said, because people buy with emotion and they justify with logic.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
that's exactly
that's
what
well said. Absolutely well said. Um, Let me give you a couple examples of things I did at Disney because I know your initial query to me asked about Disney training. So a couple examples come to mind. Custodio was having a problem with new hires. They were doing a pixie dust class. This is wonderful, and you're going to create magic, and the custodians would get out on the job, and all of a sudden discovering they're cleaning up poop and vomit, and turnover was like 25%. So my task was to figure out how to teach poop and vomit. I at the Disney University, I found a way to get them to all exit the building. I had them go out on the porch and evaluate what needed to be cleaned up on the porch. And while they were gone, now this is in the era before the internet, so I had to visit every Spencer's Gifts, and there was no Amazon, but I visited every Spencer's Gifts in the Orlando area. And when they came back into the room, there was this gorgeous display of plastic poop, plastic vomit, melted plastic ice cream. All the no substances that they were going to have to clean. And it was priceless. A guy walked into the room and he said, "Oh, I see what we're talking about." And it was fun and magical, but still very serious. My asbestos awareness class was called Asbestos Story. And Bess and Tess were two speakers or two sisters. And one of the sisters did everything right around asbestos, and the other sister did everything wrong. So I couldn't get that through the system, but I thought that that would have been marvelous. Um, I'm in the cafeteria with my boss at Disney University, and he says to me, "So, Len, tell me, how do we make this asbestos awareness so that we can teach it in any language?" And I said, "You're asking the wrong question, Greg." He got kind of bristly. He sat straight up and he said, "Okay, smart guy, what's the right question?" And I said, "Well, how do we make language not matter?"
Mm, wow.
And his eyes got really wide. So what I did was I watched all the videos that vendors had out there about asbestos awareness, but I watched them all with the sound off. And the one you could figure out with the sound off was the one we took. And I was frankly shocked at how most of them were not very good. They just put whatever video with the language. Now, there's one other program I want to tell you about, and this is at Animal Kingdom. And my boss, the wonderful Sharon Medill, was having problems. She was in charge of Camp Mini Mickey, which was where the characters were, and the animal programs people were giving her a hard time. And the reason they were giving her a hard time was they were insistent that every cast member know animal facts so they could answer those animal facts to guests. Now, the biggest fact they were worried about a lot of facts, but the one that came up in every conversation is, why does the gorilla throw feces at me? Okay, now consider this. We're talking about character performers. You've got this 5 foot girl in a Mickey head, and a child comes up to her and says, "Mickey, why did the gorilla throw crap at me?" That's just not going to happen. Sharon was under immense pressure to preach the conservation message to these character performers. Asked me to put a program together. So I did that thing we were talking about earlier with the numerical stuff. And I asked, well, what's this really about at root? and I came up with celebrate nature.
Okay.
It's a bigger picture than feces and gorillas. And okay, so if you're going to celebrate nature, what kind of class would work? Well, it seems kind of counterproductive to do that class in a classroom. However, we had these kiosks where the characters performed in Camp Mini Mickey, and the Camp Mini Mickey people in not in character costume, but in normal costume were called camp counselors. And the whole thing was themed as an Adirondack camp. So I said, they're scouts, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, whatever. They're camp counselors. So we took those kiosks and we started off after hours when the park had just closed. And we literally hiked through the woods with backpacks on, got into one of those kiosks. We did morning exercises. They were like Camp Minnie, Mickey, and I don't even know if I remember Wingabo, which was Pocahontas's way of saying hello. Those were our morning stretches. We spread a blanket out. We sat down. We had hot chocolate. We had them close their eyes and listen for sounds. When they opened their eyes, I asked them, what did you hear? And they heard two things. They heard natural sounds, they heard mechanical sounds, because the park was in the process of being cleaned. Which sounds better? The natural sounds. So that's right. What I want you to do is go out into the camp and sketch something in the camp that catches your eye as nature. And so they go do their sketch and they come back and, one would do the wishing well and one would do a tree and whatever. And they would show those sketches. They would explain why it touched them as part of nature and introduce who they were. So notice I did introductions, but they were like 20 minutes in. We didn't waste the first 20 minutes of a program with introductions. And then we said, "That's right. That's nature, and you are nature's ambassadors here. You're celebrating nature as a camp counselor. So now let us teach you the things you need to know to be a camp counselor."
That's such a fantastic way of doing things because I think about all the trainings that I've sat through where and you've sat through these two, Len, where it's like, okay, well, thank you all for being here. We're going to go around the room now and everyone's going to introduce themselves and tell us one interesting thing about you. Yeah, exactly right. Because here's the thing. While I'm sitting there waiting, I'm thinking about what am I going to say when I stand up? And I'm not listening to the person talking. And
Yeah,
then
and from an entertainer's perspective, you're squandering your opening.
yeah. Yeah, that's a fantastic, story. I
Okay,
appreciate you
now
sharing.
let me give you the rest of the training, though.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, after they got all the facts they needed to get, this is where the animal stuff came in and other things. Then we went to the wishing well and we fished. And in the wishing well, I had cardboard cutouts laminated of fish with a washer on the end of them. And I sent one of my trainers to behind the Magic Kingdom to cut some bamboo. Security guy, what are you doing there? And we created a Tom Sawyer like fishing pole with a magnet on the end, and you'd fish and you'd pull out a fish, and the fish had a question on the back. And if you could answer the question, you kept the fish. And if you couldn't answer it, somebody else could answer it. And one of the catches was a tin can, and that gave us a chance to talk about nature. And another was flounder, and they said, "Oh, throw that back one. That one we want to save." Um, and then after that, we got back into the kiosk, and by now it's dark. We lit steno, which is the stuff that they keep food warm and banquets. We roasted marshmallows, and we told scary stories. And the scary stories were guest complaints. And then we did the camp counselor pledge and hiked back to the cafeteria and everybody went home. People asked to take that class again.
I can imagine. That sounds amazing, and one of the things I like about it is the respect that you showed to the people in the room, because so often we see trainers who wanna be that sage on a stage, and they wanna go in and say, "I'm about to pour all of my knowledge into you, you empty vessels. You're gonna be so impressed with me. Wait till the end of this. You're gonna love it." And what you went in saying is, "You all have value to contribute. You all have knowledge to contribute. Let's get that out and share it with everyone."
Yeah, that's exactly right. In fact, in my Cartoons for Trainers book, I have one cartoon that shows this guy walking surrounded by Secret Service agents, and somebody says to somebody else, "Who is he? The president?" He said, "No, he's our trainer." Because I really think that's true. And the one thing I've heard about myself, boy, this is going to sound like a brag, but the one thing I've heard about myself is real and humble, and I try to do that. But the reason that most organizations don't do this depth of training is because it's a lot of work. You can't just throw a bunch of bullet points on the screen and I'm done.
Yeah, and it sounds like Disney really looked at training as an investment, not an expense.
I think that's true. But they also looked at it as being able to say, well, we covered that with them. So, we're not on the hook. You can't sue us. We told them.
Well, we've got
And I
about
think every organization does that.
yeah, we've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to give you time to go over the LearnerTainment 8 if you want.
Okay. And of course, I sent them to you, but I didn't print them out for me. So I might miss one. Can
Well, I
you
can
give me
through
one and we'll
I've got them
talk
right
about it?
here. So principle 1 is emotion creates memory. So evoke emotion.
Yeah. I think we've already talked about that. Is that, but the point is that the limbic system is the gatekeeper for long term memory and the center of emotions. So if somebody's having an emotional reaction in your program, you've got a better chance of them remembering something about it.
Yep. Principle 2 is perspectives deepen meaning. So layer learning.
Yeah, I don't know if there's such a thing as learning styles. They haven't isolated it in an area of the brain. I particularly don't think they've isolated multiple intelligences. But my take is I don't care if those things are real or not. Anything that forces me to do different methodologies and modalities throughout a training program is valuable because at some point I'm going to hit every learner where they live. You think about that presentation you referenced in 2024. Do you remember me switching modalities
Hmm.
constantly?
I do.
Like what? I hope I'm not putting you on the spot. Like, can you give an example of what?
No, I remember at one point I'm sitting at the table learning, and at the next point I'm standing up and I'm going and I'm part of a line of people who, and now I'm holding things, and so now I've gone from just being a being a passive member of the audience to actually a participant in the training. And so there's the tactile, there's the auditory, there's the visual. There are so many different ways to learn in that.
Yeah, and I used to chart all that with the 8 multiple intelligences to make sure that I was doing that. Um, but I've gotten to the point where I can just kind of put this stuff together now because, from practice with it. But I think the argument over whether learning styles exist is a false argument. In fact, I'm going to slip into one of the other of the LearnerTainment 8. I design my programs this way. Why should I pay attention to you? What is it? How does it work? Where can I use it? And I'm continually going around that circle. And it's the same circle that a good movie uses. Prologue, why should I pay attention to you? Act one, what is this movie about? Act two, the plot is in motion and all these sorts of things are happening. Act two usually ends with things are falling apart. Act three, where can I use this? And that is, well, everything comes together. And how do I walk away with a satisfying conclusion? And I continually go around that wheel. I did like 4 or 5 of those in that presentation, you offered. And the other, inspiration for this is something called format, 4, like the number, MAT. Bernice McCarthy created that, and it's a marvelous model. So the nice thing about knowing you're doing why, what, how, where is it helps you eliminate a lot of stuff because if it doesn't fit cleanly, it doesn't belong. But why should I pay attention to you? What is this about? How does it work? Where can I use it?
Fantastic. Yeah, you have to keep um, the need to know stuff in there. The nice to know stuff can you can get that later. Principle 3, the environment talks. Stage the surroundings.
Yeah, Walt Disney was perfect at this. Yeah, yeah. Go to a mall and you get tired really quickly because there's all these senses and sounds and sights and smells bombarding you. It's tedious. It gets very tiring. You don't get that same feeling at the Magic Kingdom. it's a homogeneous place where every element in the environment is speaking the same language. And that's another thing I did in 24 is I made sure that as much as I could control the environment, because I couldn't control I only have 15 minutes to set up. So there's some things I could not control. But if you're in a training room and there's junk against the wall, they're going to look at that junk at some point. If people are in a training room, I want them looking only at the stuff I want them looking at. So there's two factors to that. One is a PowerPoint that is absolutely breathtakingly beautiful, and the other is things on the walls. And for instance, for leadership training, when people entered the room, I would have a series of quotes spread out on the tables. And their first task was to find a quote they liked and put it on the wall. So then, throughout the whole learning program for these leaders, I had quotes from leaders all around the room and could reference them. Who had this one? And why'd you have this one? That's right. And that's in the subject we're going to talk about next. So you're controlling the entire environment as much as you can. And that includes how it smells, how the seats feel, the auditory signal, which is music, which is another one of the LearnerTainment things. But everything about the environment you can control, you control.
Yeah, Pete Blank is a friend of mine. He used to train at
Yes,
Disney.
Pete and I are old buddies.
Yeah, a great trainer. He was one of the first people I saw train at the training magazine conference at Expo, and he talks about the need to engage all five senses. And one thing that he brought to my attention that I hadn't thought about, you kind of touched on it there, was the fact that Disney has a paint that kind of makes things invisible. And so you've got to, if there's stuff in the room that people shouldn't be looking at, you need to make that disappear.
Yeah, go away gray it's called, or go away blue. Yes, that's very true. And Pete really knows this stuff. He was at Disney University when I was there. So what's another principle?
Principle 4, visuals aid retention, present with props.
Okay, you think about what words are. They're visuals that have to be translated because you're looking at them visually. So when you put in a bunch of words on a PowerPoint slide, you're putting a visual up there. So why not put a real visual? They're going to have to translate it anyway. And another facet of that is propping the room. So for the custodial folks, I propped the room with the machines. Well, the third shift custodial training, I propped the room with the machines they'd be using. And that got them all fired up, Oh, let me see that. But why wouldn't you do that? Why would you just leave the room boring? That's also why I use music, which is another one of the principles. But music is like an auditory signal filling the room.
Yeah, that's principle 6, mix in music. Principle 5 is suggestions guide outcome, make it magical. I'm curious what that means.
Yeah, magicians and trainers are actually a lot alike. A magician says, I'm going to trick you. I'm going to manipulate you. But as a result, you're going to have a good time. So the audience goes along until the first time they see a trick fail. The trainer says, I'm going to manipulate you and you're going to learn. And that works till they say, now we're going to start with an icebreaker.
Yeah.
But it's about creating this magical space where it's okay to fail and it's okay to learn. Georgy Lozanoff, the father of suggestology, which ended up being called accelerated learning, suggested that the trainer should create an aura of joyfulness, happiness in the room that makes it possible to learn. So it's about creating a magical environment.
Excellent. We talked about 6, mix in music.
Yeah, let me say one thing.
Go ahead, sure.
Another thing about music. If you noticed, when you came into the room, a song was playing. And it was a special mix of the song. It's a song called Good Times from the disco era. Good times, these are the good times. And the reason I say it's a special mix is because when I started it, 10 minutes to go before the program started, it just had the bass playing. And that song is like 20 minutes long. The disco era, that's how they were. So it kept building and building and building. Now, some people might say, well, but that's an old song. Why would you do that? Well, I did it for two reasons. The message was you're going to have a good time here. Now, probably no one in the room caught that consciously, but subconsciously, they were all fired up by the time I started talking. And the other thing is I don't think it's valuable to use current material because current material is current. It's better to use something that's old. It might bring memories, but the memories are back in the recesses of the mind. They're not as top of mind as the latest Taylor Swift album. So it was okay to use an old song, and it had the right message.
Principle 7 is laughter produces positivity. So harness humor.
Yeah, you don't need to be Robin Williams. Sorry, he's gone, but you don't need to be a comedian. The truth is, mildly amusing is often good enough in a training room because people are going to laugh. They laugh out of uncomfort as much as they laugh out of comfort. And if you pay attention, when somebody laughs, everybody in the room turns to see what happened because they all want to be in on the gag. And humor is like tossing a ball. If you don't catch the ball, you don't get the punchline. So if you stick some humor in there, all you have to do is try things. And when something gets a giggle, you expand on it. If it gets a bigger giggle, you expand on it more. You keep expanding till it stops working, and then you back up. And before you know it, you've got a bunch of lines you can use. Now, for instance, I've thought through a lot of this stuff ahead of time. I'm clumsy. So if I fall off a stage, I know what I'm going to say. I will now take questions from the floor. If if in the next room they're making a way more noise than we are, and let's just say that this is for the training conference and ASTD, which was the other training organization. So anyhow, people in the next room are making a lot of noise, and then I would say to my audience, well, you have to forgive them. That's just ASTD, and they're mad that we're having a good time. Or if my technology screwed up, I would say, let's say I'm doing something for Coca-Cola and the technology screws up. I would say, so I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank the executives at Coke for bringing me in, and I want to thank Pepsi for the technology.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
But it's a case of thinking these through. One gag that has disappeared from TV, but still gets a laugh is now I'm not an expert at brain theory, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn last night. I mean, it's a sure laugh, and nobody's expecting you to be that funny. So anything that's mildly humorous works.
Principle 8, the last and final, professionalism produces results. So perfect the performance.
Yeah, performance. There's a lot of debate. I hear this in the speaker world about whether you should practice or be spontaneous. I'm a practice guy. Now, candidly, we're doing this today spontaneously, but it's all well-trod territory, so I can just throw it out. But for a new presentation like what I did in 24, I practice. And practice doesn't mean looking at your slides and reading them off. What practice means, practice is a gift because it allows you to see where the problems could be. It allows you to make corrections for those problems. It allows you to force yourself to do things you wouldn't normally do. For instance, I'm left-handed, so I tend to favor the left side of the stage. So now that I've discovered that, I put my props on the right-hand side so that I'm using more of the room. The goal of practice isn't so you can regurgitate lines, and that's why it gets a bad name. The goal of practice is to know your content so well that it's like you get in your car after work, and 20 minutes later, or however long it is, you're home, and you don't quite know how that happened, but it just happened
Yeah.
because you practiced at it.
And it's such a comfort when you get in there, when something does go wrong. You're like, yeah, well, we can still keep moving forward because I know what this is about and we've been here before. And this
Yeah, and the happy truth is, if something goes wrong and you handle it well, you're gonna gain more respect than if nothing ever went wrong. You think about that situation with Chris Rock and Will Smith, where Will Smith came up on the stage at the Oscars and slapped Chris Rock. Um, Rock handled that like a true professional, and he couldn't have known that was coming.
Mhm.
And so once you know your stuff, once you're confident, you can handle whatever happens and come out with it seeming even more magical because you solved it.
Well, then your session at this upcoming training magazine conference is Training Gone Wild: Lessons Learned Launching Disney's Animal Kingdom. And I think one lesson that we've learned today is if you're going to this, you need to get there early because it will fill up quickly.
Yeah, we shall see. They've got me on the death watch, and that is the very first session of the conference, and people are just checking in. So who knows? I also I can't let today go by without talking about this a little bit, although
Sure, sure.
it looks backwards. The Sound Systems, my new book, and it's an intellectual exercise on my part. Wondered what the North Pole would be, how it would be run if it actually existed. And so I spent a year figuring this out, and I use it to talk about leadership principles. So I'll give you one fun tidbit from the Santa system. Rudolph's a girl,
Okay.
and the reason is because male reindeers don't have antler in late December. So the males got fired from the sleigh, and the girls pull the sleigh. And Rudolph was brought in. The song got it all wrong. Rudolph was brought in to be the team leader because the girls were getting kind of catty in the stable. And Rudolph, to try to get them to buck up. No, buck up. Get it? No. Um, yeah, that's those guys are gone. But established the reindeer game, and the reindeer refused to play. It's not that they wouldn't let Rudolph play; it's the reindeer refused to play. So Rudolph launched it at the North Pole, and the activities are really interesting. There's, of course, there's standard things like ice carving and Santa cocoa dunking, but there's also the funniest one is the Santa bag races. You know, where you put your feet in a bag and you hop along. But the problem is Santa's bag's full of surprise toys. so, so it's a very funny circumstance. Oh, and her name's Ruby, and she doesn't have an electric nose. She wears a gem, a ruby gem in her nose, and it reflects the light
That all makes complete sense. Well,
in an
listen,
absurd sort of way.
I want to thank you for being here. We packed a lot into this one, but I know there's going to be so much more that you have to offer folks at the expo. So there's going to be there's going to be a crowd there, and I know it because what you have to offer is so valuable. But thank you for your time and thank you for joining me today.
And let me say one thing, and that is that if you want to follow up and ask me questions, Len with two N's at likeamouse.com.
Roger that.
Len with two N's at
Uh,
likeamouse.com. And thank you for inviting me. Believe it or not, I don't get these invites often. I'm glad to do it.
uh,
Um,
you're very
and
welcome. I'll put your
so let
email and links to your books in the show notes also.
Okay, that would be wonderful. Let me just close my final words saying, hopefully, I'll hear from you, or I'll see you at training, or somewhere or another we'll connect. And then I just want to leave you with what my former boss would say. See you real soon.